Welcome back to another episode of Marvel News Desk, the official podcast of MCU Exchange, and the best place to keep up with all the latest news, reviews, and speculation concerning the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Today it is just Rhiannon and I. Rhiannon is on Twitter as Brooklyn Wallace at Shot of Patron. I'm Caleb, and you can find me at Caleb A. Borchers. Also, later on, when we do our Black Panther talk, we're going to have Michael T. Ford III with us. You can find him on Twitter at MTFIII. Obviously, MTF the third, but MTFIII is the handle. We are just going to jump right into our news. Got a few things to talk about before Black Panther, but we want to get to Black Panther as quick as possible, so there probably won't be too much talk here. Speaking of Black Panther, it's making a lot of money. It's looking like the 3-day total for the weekend will be like about 195, and the 4-day weekend with President's Day is going to get to like 220, 230. Every time I look at it, it's going up. I mean, it's worse than a scale. It just keeps climbing and climbing and climbing. I guess we're not surprised, right, Rhiannon? Like, it's just making lots of money and people keep coming to see it.
Yeah, I compared it to Titanic earlier this week. I just remember, and very few of our listeners probably do, but when Titanic came out, it just hit this weird nerve, and people just went and saw it over and over and over. And I think that's what Black Panther is going to do.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because it has this big opening, and usually if you have a big opening, you have less of a multiplier, right? Because lots of people see it, there's a lot of pent-up demand, but then people, have seen it and they get it out of their system. And so we usually have movies like Avengers or Age of Ultron that open really huge. Well, not Avengers. Avengers was another story. Age of Ultron opened really big. Civil War was kind of this way, opened huge. But, then only got about 2.25, 2.5 time multiplier. The kind of I want to see this again and again stuff we're hearing makes me think that this is going to be a 3.5. And given what it's starting at, it's incredible. I mean, that's going to be a ton of money that they're bringing in. And so it really is, as somebody who watches the box office stuff more than I should and thinks about those numbers too much, this is kind of defying box office physics. And it's really kind of incredible to see. So Kevin Feige has said that the voices for the Black Order are going to be some familiar voices that we've heard before. I didn't ask you this ahead, Rhiannon. Is there any voice actor that you would love to see in Infinity War as one of these villains?
No, I don't really have strong feelings on voice actors. If it's an actor I already know and I recognize their voice, that actually kind of takes me out of the moment because I'm like, that face and that voice doesn't match. Who is that? What's going on? So just, yeah, that's not a big deal to me.
Yeah. There's a voice actor who does one of who does the main guard in Aladdin, like the guard that's always coming after Aladdin.
Yeah.
And he does a voice in Star Wars Rebels as well. And it really bothers me because I'm like, wait a minute, why is Aladdin, it always takes me out every time I hear his voice. But I'd like to see Mark Hamill. I think it would be a fun way to bring Mark Hamill into a Marvel movie since he's a very well-known voice actor as well. So Thor Ragnarok is about to have a home release, and we saw a clip of Grandmaster living with Team Daryl. Do you like the Team Daryl shorts, Rhiannon? Would you buy the movie just for that?
I would not buy the movie just for that, but I will definitely watch the YouTube clip of it over and over and over. I love Team Daryl. And Grandmaster, Goldblum was being Goldblum fantastically, so.
There's more talk about a all-female Marvel movie. Obviously, Black Panther has a lot of strong female characters, and so there was some more talk around the 10th anniversary stuff with Tessa Thompson, as far as making real clear to Kevin Feige that they would like an all-female movie. I think we've talked about that some before. It would seem, however, between Wonder Woman and Black Panther, that maybe we're going to suddenly see a glut of movies here that have some non-traditional, not so white, not so guy casts now that maybe Hollywood is finally going to figure out that people will pay to see movies like that?
That's my guess. And I think we're gonna see some horrible, I mean, not within Marvel. I mean, I think Marvel's gonna do it very well. Um, I think n throughout the entertainment industry, we're gonna see some awful attempts while they try to figure out how to create these movies.
Yeah, I think there's a truth that Hollywood always takes the wrong lesson from both success and failure.
Yeah.
And so instead of, hey, let's find women or African Americans or some other, ethnic group and let's give them an opportunity to tell a story that's authentically theirs. Instead of that story, I'm sure what many execs probably at places like Sony are like, oh, we've got to do lots of black movies now. Like that's just the message they're going to take. And so it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But it is nice that it should speed up how often that we're going to see things like Black Panther or Wonder Woman, which is a good thing, I think. Let's make this the last bit of news because we want to talk about Black Panther. There was an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. poster, and it's kind of hard to tell. It's celebrating the 100th episode. Oh, okay. There's been a series of trailers or of posters.
Yeah.
That commemorate the different seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. When I saw this first one, I thought they were bringing back Hive for the 100th episode, and I was like, no, please don't. But it looks like they're just commemorative, huh?
Yeah, and I think we even, because we put out on Twitter, like, one of those articles, it was, the 3rd season or something like this, p the 3rd season, and what it was they had a poster for the 3rd season because everybody was like, "They're not on their 3rd season." But they did one for, like, every season.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to look back at it, and see kind of the things. I forget things that are in. I don't know. I saw Lincoln and was kind of happy and kind of sad all at the same time,
Aw.
I think that does it. I don't think there's any other major news. Punisher season 2 is beginning production. I think
Yeah.
we knew that. Yeah, they're moving fast on this one. It feels like.
They're getting into that groove where they go straight from one to the next. So my guess is as soon as they finish filming Daredevil or Iron Fist, they'll move right into Punisher.
All right, it's time for us to talk about Black Panther. At long last, the movie is here. We've all seen it. We are excited to kind of give our review of it. So I wanted to start today with our guest. Michael, go ahead and tell us. Let's just start with like a general review. How did you feel the movie was? Did you enjoy it? Just how did you feel about Black Panther?
Oh, I loved it. I've seen it more than once by now. So I was telling some friends that the first time I did love it, but I was so anxious and so nervous. My expectations were so high that I was clenched for the entire movie, worried that something was going to happen to ruin how much I was enjoying it. And after that, I got that out of the way, I was able to truly appreciate how great it was and all the good things and all of the moments that I thought took it out of the range of sort of your general good Marvel movie, even your general great Marvel movie, and put it in the kind of transcending comic movie range. Oh yeah. I mean, I think that when I really think about it, I feel like only Winter Soldier and First Guardians are in that territory of where you can have someone who's not interested in comic characters or comic books at all and say, you know what, you just can watch this movie and love it.
Yeah, I had a friend or two on Facebook that has already said something like, I hate comic book movies, but Black Panther's awesome. And I think that's
Right.
huge for Marvel to see that happen,
Well, and that's something I mentioned in a couple of places, but noticed it at least at the one showing that I did. A bunch of people left before the after credits, so they're hitting an audience.
Yeah, I had to snag some people at my screener a couple of nights ago. I was like, no, there's more. So that definitely bodes well for the box office because you're dealing with first timers who aren't familiar with the whole Marvel way, and maybe they made some new fans.
Yeah, I don't know if it was this movie or what, but when we went into our theater, the guy, there was an usher to kind of help us find our seats because we did IMAX and it was reserved seating. And as he took it, he's like, go up to the right, and you're going to be in the middle, row J, and make sure you stay for the 2 post-credit scenes. Like, that was like being told to us as we came in. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Rhiannon, generally, how did you find the movie?
I enjoyed it, definitely. And I'm described it to several people as, I had a feeling at some point during the movie that this must have been what it was like when people first saw Star Wars. That it was the beginning of something iconic, completely original, just like a whole new world, and big, which it's already proving to be. Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mike said, in that it totally did not feel like a Marvel movie, or it felt sort of outside or alone in the Marvel universe, and but it just felt new.
Yeah, I was really impressed. A lot of the world building stuff, like I don't think I expected Wakanda to be such a deep place. Like, they kind of brought us in and they show us the capital city, and I'm like, oh wow, that's really cool. And then they start to show us like Shuri's lab and some of the vibranium stuff, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then we see the necropolis, and then we see the falls, and then we go to like M'Baku's mountain region, and each time there was a new setting, I was like, this world is richer and fuller and bigger than I expected it to be. And it was just kind of fun to keep seeing new places. And it made me think, like, I don't know, it could be easy to think that the Marvel Universe was kind of finished, that we've seen it all, we've seen all the corners. And this movie was just like, nope, we have got so many more places to go, so many more things to see. And just like the set design and stuff was fantastic. And it was also kind of over the top, not in a bad way, but like there was fantastic places. It wasn't just like, oh, here's a couple of skyscrapers. Like the way that they use sculpture, and like that giant gorilla sculpture at M'Baku's palace, I thought was so. It's like fun and very comic book esque, and they were willing to go to those places, right. And it didn't hurt the feel of the movie.
Yeah, one thing that I will say was a slight knock. Which is something that I'll need to pay a little bit more close attention to the next time I see the movie, is the sense of scale, it being a full country rather than kind of your old classical city-state, where there's one main city and then sort of smaller, estates in the outskirts. I mean, maybe I'm a little spoiled because reading the Ta-Nehisi Coates Black Panther comic, there's a map that he puts in to every issue of the country of Wakanda and the major cities and the areas, and it helps you to realize that you're covering hundreds of miles more so than just one city at its outskirts.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see. I think if they give, if Coogler stays on, I could see them going to other cities and seeing other facets. Like, I think we got a little bit of a hint of it in the fact that there was kind of the different tribes, and they all had their own, like, colors and garments and all that kind of stuff that kind of suggested the world was fuller than even what we got to see.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love the costume design, and unfortunately, I'm not as well read and in different African tribal traditions, but I knew enough to know that each of the tribes kind of represented different facets, style, and different, from the I forgot the term for the lip obtrusion, and then also the facial tattoos in the River tribe. Every tribe kind of had both its sort of color scheme as well as costuming scheme that also helped to build out the idea that even though this was an exotic country, it was an exotic country that also had its own groups within it, and it wasn't a monoculture.
Let's talk a little bit about characters. I mean, this really was an ensemble movie, more than some of the other solo movies have been. There's lots of different characters that were added into the world. I guess for each of you guys, Just give us one character that you loved in this movie and why you thought they were awesome, you know?
Well, I mean, I didn't know anything about Shuri before we went into this. And so she was definitely, when she first started, I was like, oh, it's the bratty little sister that just, is always there for a little bit of snark. And she turned out to be so much more than that. They really just sort of blew that characteristic out of the water. I mean, yes, she was the snarky little sister, but she was also the Tony Stark of this universe. And
Yeah, I loved.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I loved how much of a millennial Shuri was, and I wasn't prepared for it.
Exactly. It was like she, at first, yeah, just on the surface, she was a little girl that didn't want to do things, and then like she turned out to be way on top of everything. So yeah, she just really stood out to me.
Yeah, that was really the one that came to my mind. I think she's really the star of this in a lot of ways. I guess I'll mention I really enjoyed M'Baku and kind of his role.
M'Baku.
Like he was, he had this thing where he's kind of the villain, and then he kind of comes in, and then he had like a humor that I wasn't expecting and was really kind of enjoyable. And I think the thing that's really great about him is that I can see him developing. Like, I could see this being a character that can shift back and forth. I think some people were disappointed that maybe he was lost as a potential villain, but I could see situations like with Killmonger where he will help T'Challa because he sees like a foreign influence coming into their nation. But then, Black Panther 2, if his friendship with Cap and Bucky somehow causes trouble for Wakanda, I could see him totally flipping to the other side and being like, I was with you against the outsider, but now that you and your buddies are causing trouble for our country, I'm not with you anymore. And I could see him sort of having that allegiance that moves back and forth that will allow him to be a protagonist or antagonist based on what they need in that universe,
Definitely. And he oozed charisma. I'm not familiar that much with Winston Duke's other work, but he, the camera loved him, and he commanded every scene that he was in. And someone made the joke about, I don't know if you guys watch Game of Thrones, about him being King of the North. And once they said that, I kind of couldn't unsee it, that he's got his kingdom, but he just doesn't believe in bowing to the other king. And like you said, I think from a standpoint, I think he crossed the Rubicon where he can't be a pure villain, but he can definitely be an antagonist because he has something that he stands for that he's not willing to compromise on.
So, what about you, Michael? Who would you put as your favorite, character that we haven't talked about so far?
Well, I guess I'll pick Okoye. I didn't really have a high expectation. I know that Denai Guerrero is a good actress, but I didn't think they would give her as much to work with as they did. I didn't expect her to have a romance. I didn't expect her to have such showcased action sequences where, we forget at times that she doesn't have superpowers, because of the things that she's doing that are comparable to what T'Challa's doing.
Yeah, and I really liked how they developed the Dora Milaje in this movie. As far as I feel like they were a little more at the front than say where they were in say Christopher Priest's run.
Oh, definitely further than Christopher Priest. Yeah,
but they weren't as antagonistic as they often are in Coates' run. I feel like Coogler kind of made his own version,
Well, I think what Coogler did is he laid the foundation for if they ever do want to go the direction of the Coates' run, it's right there for them. And I also think that he made them, much by having Okoye out in front, and you got this sense that she's so much more experienced than T'Challa is, that, she could be a leader in her own right. And, she has the Dora Milaje on her side who are willing to, willing to go where she goes. I think there was a pivotal scene where Nakia tried to get her to leave. And I think another actress could have played it in a different kind of way, but Okoye played it as, this is my duty. You may have the luxury as a queen or as a queen consort, to go your own way, but I stand for the state. What Wakanda means, is filtered through me. And whoever sits on the throne, whatever the transition of power might be, the Dora Milaje is sort of at a higher level of a calling. And, I guess that resonated for me, for Okoye to sort of create her own heroic journey.
Yeah, and I think it's an important layer because, I don't know, we're living in a time where some of our leaders are very disappointing to us. And it's really, like, easy to feel like you should never, ever, like, help out or be part of something that you don't agree with. But, like, that's an interesting tension that is a reality in society. Like, if you're a Secret Service member, you have to protect the president no matter how much you like them or not, or the idea of taking orders from a general. And I think that's an interesting dynamic to force some of the characters into.
Exactly. And then, she still, when the time came for her to stand on the right side, she did that too. So she didn't go all the way to the I'm just following orders place that we all feel squicky about. She was in the place of, this is the state. This is what holds the country together. And, we can't just have a coup. We can't just break down. There'd be nothing to save if we did that.
So let's talk a little bit about Killmonger and as a villain. I mean, obviously Michael B. Jordan is a significant presence in this movie. I mean, as far as Disney villains, as far as Marvel villains go, is Killmonger one of your favorites? Like, how did you feel Michael B. Jordan did in that place that's been so tricky for so many other actors?
So I have complicated feelings about Killmonger, the comic character. I've always felt that he's been badly drawn in terms of what his motivations are, almost cartoonishly so. And I like the layers both in how the character was written and how the character was performed, and adding the element of him being of royal blood, but being not just Americanized, but exposed to oppression and militance in Black America and the Black diaspora, and feeling like not just that he was entitled to Wakandan birthright, but that his people, that Black people all around the world were, had their backs turned on them by this culture that was isolationist. By giving him that additional piece of motivation, even though he was still evil, it gave him a cause, a righteousness that the character in the comics tends to lack. The character in the comics is just kind of your standard Americanized, I just want to turn my back on Wakandan tradition, which, sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't. I thought the combination of, again, what he stood for and how Michael B. Jordan, he does so much acting with his eyes and so much pain behind his line delivery and his scene delivery. Even when he's being menacing, you can kind of see that the menace is almost like a mask to hide pain.
I think there's very little to say after all of that Mike just went through. I've been thinking on him, and I actually went back and watched Creed yesterday, and he is just a very quiet, that point of him acting with his eyes rather than being like just out there. It's a much more subtle act that he does, and it was such a complex villain. It was complex for the audience, but for him, it was not complex. He was I mean, he had a very good point. He understood it. There was no doubt in his mind about what he was going with. And I enjoyed I find myself days after seeing it sitting here going, but was he really a bad guy? Like, was he really?
I mean, he was definitely a bad guy.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I mean, I was interested in. I almost talked to you about this on Facebook, Rhiannon, but I figured I'd save it for the podcast. You'd kind of mentioned this like online, like it's a villain that some people might side with. I mean, I didn't quite see it that way. In as much as, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to bring this all down, but like we had a.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. I mean, I think I know where you're going.
yeah.
We had a major shooting in our country this week, and we're having a conversation about what kind of weapons should be available to the public. And then the villain of this movie is a guy that wants to put even more lethal weapons into the hands of thousands of people across the world. And so to me, right. I'm not confused about Killmonger. I don't like him because he's wanting to arm the world in a time when what we need is less weapons. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I don't know, maybe this will get us hate mail, but
Caleb, his name is Killmonger. It's perfect. For him, violence is the answer.
Right.
And I think that's what makes him such a compelling villain, that he's seen violence all around him. He's seen oppression all around him. He's studied history. He knows that there have been violent revolutions. There have been, that a lot has happened in the world. A lot of social change is tied to death and suffering. So he's embraced it wholeheartedly, even against, I think. So at the end, let's talk about the end. Let's jump to the end and then go back. So his death said so much about the guy that he was and the guy that he could have been. He was told about this wondrous place, Wakanda, and that stood in such stark contrast to the world that he had seen. And he, even as he's dying and watching Wakanda, watching the sunset on Wakanda, the beautiful sunset that his father told him about, it's still a fairy tale to him. It's still something that his father told him when he was a child to make him happy. But everything in his life up until that point was not that. And he would rather die than take another breath, in this world where he's not free, and, in his mind, his people are not free. So, I mean, again, I do think he's a villain. I think it was really important to show that he doesn't have respect for women. He doesn't have respect for tradition. He only respects violence. And even though it comes from a place of pain, it's important to call that out as villainy. But it's a tragic villainy more so than sort of existential villainy, like a Thanos or something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I felt like his motivations were compelling, but ultimately the place that it takes him is not a place that I want to go, and so I felt like they did a really great job. That's what makes him an awesome villain within the MCU, I think.
And it's such a shame that we're not going to get him again.
Well, so I was going to ask that question. Do you think that's a mistake that we're not going to see him again? Or was it required for him to, his death is a big part of people how are evaluating that role. Would we have felt the same way about this villain if he hadn't have died the way he did?
Probably not. But, obviously there's that other narrative that Marvel kills off its best villains.
Right.
Excuse me. But I guess, I mean, as a comic reader, I'm very interested in seeing how this performance influences the way that the Killmonger character will be written in the books. Because Ta-Nehisi hasn't touched him yet, and I'm hoping that seeing that and the complexity that's brought to the character going forward in the text will expand the way that people think about Killmonger and his influence, in terms of what, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to explain, but anyone can come back. This is comic books after all. But I liked his arc, and I did feel like he had to die, but I'm gonna miss him anyway.
And I feel like, I don't know, they could maybe get away with him coming back in the future, and he's like in Shuri's lab and she's healed him, and he's like, I told you to let me die, and T'Challa was like, yeah, I decided I wasn't going to do that. Like, whatever.
Oh, well, so my headcanon, since I do that kind of stuff, my headcanon was that he would have kind of his people who knew about him and became kind of followers of Killmonger who tried to bring him back.
Oh, okay.
They exhumed his body and and tried to bring him back. Kind of like how in X-Men comics there are people who love Magneto even beyond the point that Magneto wants to go.
Let's talk a little bit about Claw. I think we got a little bit of a misdirect with him. Are you guys glad that we got only as much as we did, or did he go too soon?
He probably went when he needed to go for Killmonger to truly level up. I thought that what we got out of Claw was great. And he's another one that I'm going to miss because he was just fun. He seemed to be having fun in his villainy. And, I mean, he's almost cartoonish in his villainy, but in a, not in a way that took me out of the movie. I love the part about the SoundCloud link.
Yeah. Oh, Rhiannon, did you enjoy Andy Serkis in this?
Yeah, I mean, I liked Claw. I thought to me, he was just your villainy villain. He had, I don't know, he was just a very generic bad guy. Not one that I would probably remember long term, like if it was making my list of Marvel villains. Which, granted, because you guys, of course, every time the movie, there's been lots of talk of Marvel villains the past week. I seriously forgot who half of these guys are. Like, beyond Loki and Zemo and Thanos, some of the big ones, I just do not remember the Marvel villains, and I think Claw will just fall down in that hole for me. Like, he was somebody that they were up against, but not really. I mean, it was just sort of the decoy to get Killmonger in there.
Right. And I did find myself wondering, like, this guy's a little bit unbalanced. How did he stay ahead of the Black Panther for 30 years? He seems like somewhere along the line he would have gotten caught.
You did get the sense from Wakabi that maybe it's that T'Chaka just didn't care enough to go get him. Like there was kind of that tension there.
Yeah, but I mean, can you really trust Wakabi?
That's true. No, you cannot. You cannot trust him. I have this theory that I've come up with based on the way Andy Serkis was in Age of Ultron, and it seemed like they were really laying the groundwork for Claw. I think that the original plan was for this movie to be a little bit simpler, more vanilla story of Claw trying to steal vibranium and Black Panther stopping him. And then they signed Ryan Coogler, and he came in with a pitch that was very Killmonger heavy and had all the Oakland stuff and the past stuff. And Feige goes, oh, that's a lot better than what I've got. And they went with it. And that they had always planned for Serkis to be a bigger deal, but once Coogler gave a more compelling vision, they let him be killed off and, be a minor part because they found something better than what they had planned in the first place.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, especially because, I think of Killmonger as more of a sequel villain than a first movie villain for Black Panther. Claw's usually the villain that Black Panther has to defeat in order to come into his own. Um, and Killmonger is the threat that he can't beat, and he has to learn how to cope with defeat. The fact that they mashed those things together in one movie made for a better movie, but it does leave open questions as to where Black Panther is going to go next.
I think we all love this a lot. Is there one negative? Is there any nitpicks for you of things that you did not like out of this movie?
Yes. My biggest nitpick, I mentioned it a little bit right after I saw the movie for the first time. And, it's not as bad as when I first saw it, but it still stands out as sort of my initial nitpick. A little bit with the fight choreography. I thought that some of the score choices during the fights were not, kind of took me out of the movie. Brandon mentioned having seen Creed, and Creed's one of my favorite movies, so I've seen it a bunch of times, and it felt like some of the score was being recycled from the Creed fights. And as much as I love the Creed fights, I'm watching a Black Panther movie, and I don't want to be evoked. I don't have audio hints of Creed fights when I'm supposed to be watching T'Challa fight. But that's my major nitpick.
There were times where I found myself sitting there going, is that really his mother? And all of that. And it's like the nittiest of nitpicks because the acting and everything was great. But there were times that I looked at the royal family and I was like, they don't look related. That was just my little thing.
Now I'm trying to remember because this may be, correct me if I'm wrong. Well, actually, I have access to the internet, so give me a couple seconds to Google this. Because T'Challa's father did have a second wife. So it's possible that they were sticking with the canon where Shuri's mother, and Shuri has a different mother than T'Challa does.
So that would make perfect sense to me, like just from the way everybody looked, because she looked just like her mother.
Okay.
To me.
So,
but
yeah, so that might have been what it was.
Yeah, it hasn't been. I don't think it's been clarified in the MCU. You're right. Ramonda is the stepmother. I think she's actually the third wife of T'Chaka. I can't remember, but she's definitely not T'Challa's mom. But right. I feel like in this movie they just kind of let it lie that they were all blood related, or at the very least, just they didn't care about it. Like it wasn't something worth mentioning. Right. So
yeah, I mean, and even in the comics, I mean, she basically raised him.
Yeah.
She was the mother that he knew after his father. I mean, in the comics, his father dies when he's a child, not, the way that it happens in the movie. So he doesn't have that same kind of, across the spiritual plane. I just lost you talking to that father thing. He has the, I grew into the man that, I wish you could see deal with his father, which is much different dynamic. But yeah, I mean, like you said, they didn't really establish it one way or the other, and I guess I'm fine with it either way because Angela Bassett's an amazing actress, and she conveyed motherly love.
Yeah. So. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think my frustration with it. So the third act, I liked all the stuff at the surface, but the stuff in the mine, I just really did not enjoy. For me, it was it was almost like DC. Like, I hate to say this, but it was like Man of Steel almost. Like these two CGI figures punching each other really, really hard. And I don't love that. Like, it's not that exciting to me. It's not that interesting. I've been a little frustrated. I mean, I think it's okay, but they made this decision to make Shuri the genius of the family. And in doing so, they've kind of pulled back on the intelligence, I think, of Black Panther. Not that he's a dumb character by any means, but he, in the comics, he's, a top 10 scientific mind in the world or whatever.
Well, I think we're meant to believe because they mentioned a couple times that he had his own designs. I mean, some of the things in the lab were his design, and that she was just kind of scoffing at how much better her own designs were. So I think we're meant to put them both at that level. But I agree, they didn't have as many opportunities to showcase his scientific mind the way that I would have liked. I agree. But to say one point about that, the mind fight, I felt similarly, but I also felt that what happened for me is that the focus of the fight shifted to the battle. The battlefield fight was much more compelling than what was happening on the tracks, especially because we kind of knew that T'Challa was going to win at some point. It wasn't, it was just a matter of, all right, well, how's that going to play out, versus really. This was something that I was talking to with some friends. I was really kind of relieved in a weird way that we didn't get battlefield carnage, even though it meant that I had to suspend my disbelief super far for what was happening visually in front of me, that people weren't just dying all around us. I was much more staked in not wanting these characters that I really cared about to start murdering each other on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think the other thing I really wanted was, in the comics, Black Panther often functions almost like Batman, that he's this master tactician that sees things coming ahead. And often in the I'm thinking back to, I think, the Priest run and some of the Akibe stuff, where like he sees the coup coming and he almost kind of allows it to happen because he has a master plan for the end of it. And I think I'd kind of wanted him to have predicted Killmonger a little bit, or to have outsmarted Killmonger, to have this moment where Killmonger realized that in all of his rage and his anger that he had been duped by a tactically superior Black Panther. And we never got anything like that. Instead, we just got kind of a cool move that led to him getting stabbed, And I just, that's something I missed and I would have liked to see based on the comic character, that it's just not the way they went. But it's just something I would have preferred.
Yeah, I thought about that too. I was just kind of like, all right, well, he just had one cool move. That's cool, I suppose. Yeah, I had some conversations with Rhiannon about how I feel about the Priest run, and how making him kind of infallible the way Batman is infallible was cool for the time, but maybe has outlived its usefulness. That having him have that in his back pocket, have that skill in his back pocket, but maybe not constantly, pull the Batman move of, well, I'm Batman, I'm always 3 steps ahead of everyone, has gotten tired. And by giving him this highly competent group of support players that are every bit as Black Panther-y as he is, that actually makes Wakanda feel fresher and make us want to care about these people and their stories more, especially Shuri, I think. And, I don't want to end up thinking that zero sum, that just because Shuri is super smart that it means that T'Challa is not. I do hope they'll have the opportunity to show that they're both genius level intellect.
Yeah, and I think you point out what I think is kind of an interesting dynamic, is it's interesting to make a movie in which you're trying to talk about values of sort of equality and the power of even some of the more feminist kind of themes in this movie, of how these women are just as strong as he is, but at the same time you have a king, which is a somewhat sort of patriarchal system, how to talk about those things in the setting of a monarchy is a fascinating challenge. And it seems like they did bring him maybe down a little bit, so he didn't just float above these other characters,
Right. I thought Coogler walked that tightrope well, about showing that he was still regal, and he was still a worthwhile king, but he wasn't, like you said, floating above and on a high, and kind of diminishing everyone by virtue of that.
Do you guys have anything else you wanted to talk about with the movie before we wrap up this review?
Wait. I'm sorry. Wait. I'll say one more thing because it needs. I apologize. I'll say one more thing because it needs to be said. Nakia, Lupita Nyong'o, will you marry me?
I'm sure she listens to this podcast, so
Mm-hmm.
that'll probably be effective, I think. So
No, I just meant I more meant that we didn't talk nearly enough about
yeah,
how great Nakia was, and it needed to be said. I I made a joke about how she's the Black Widow that we really need,
yeah,
because I want to know about all her spy adventures now. I want to know why she can go everywhere and do anything, and I want to see further cool stuff before she ends up potentially as a queen.
yeah. I think the other little things I wanted to add in quickly. I love the score. There was so much stuff about Kendrick Lamar and his soundtrack coming in, which was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't expect and I never thought that they were also hiring someone to write a theatrical orchestral score. And so when that came in, I was like, oh, wow, this is great. Like, nobody's talked about this because they're so focused on the Lamar stuff. And I thought it was good and it was unique. And so many Marvel movies don't have a score that's unique that I loved that was there in addition to the sort of soundtrack songs.
Right, that's true. I agree.
I also liked what they did with Everett Ross. I think they kept some of his humor without making him as bumbling as he could be at other times. So I felt like they did pretty well with him.
See, I attribute all of that to Martin Freeman, because I hate Everett Ross, hate him a lot, and Martin Freeman played him so well, played him as he had a good heart, but he wasn't. I don't think he played him as a buffoon at all, but I think he was perfectly willing to kind of play the foil on the jokes and be the butt of the jokes at every turn, but do it with dignity.
Yeah, and there was still a fish out of water element. Like they distilled the Ross part
Right.
that works is, wow, this is a world I don't understand, and and I have the maturity to understand I don't understand this world, and I'm not going to try to dictate to these people how they're supposed to run their lives. So the fish out of water part they kept without
Right.
the bumbling stupidity stuff.
But he was still enough of in occupying his character as a CIA agent with wisdom to impart, that he wouldn't just be completely pushed out of the frame.
Let me ask one more question as we wrap it up. What was the experience in the theater like for you guys, or the experiences? Was it an enjoyable crowd? Did you feel like there was a different energy when you went into these screenings?
Oh yeah, this was a combination of Star Wars and a family reunion and a cultural experience. I mean, I think I didn't realize how important the fact that it was coming out in Black History Month was for people's kind of energy in terms of what they brought to the theater and their willingness to kind of go all in on embracing Africanness and embracing the idea of Black Panther as a cultural event. Until I went to a couple of screenings, and the way that people who were perfect strangers just looked at each other like, this is home. This is a moment for us. It was great.
Any thoughts on that, Rhiannon? What it was like for you in the movie theater?
I mean, I saw it at one of the early screenings, the fan event early screening thing. So, I mean, there was definitely a lot of anticipation because you have people lined out on the street for an hour before the movie, and you have a crowd that not only they didn't just decide to go out on Friday night. They were interested enough to enter a contest and be there and go and be there earlier and stuff. Um, and I always find those crowds to be far more enthusiastic than any average movie crowd. Um, but like I said, it's still maybe a quarter to a third of the people left before the after credit scenes. Would you say that, Mike? A third?
Yeah, well,
Or-
maybe a third. I mean, because I think a third is what I estimated, but in beforehand, but I think it was maybe around 20%.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, which normally when you're going to something, I mean, compared to, I guess, the Doctor Strange screening, I feel like everybody just sat in their seats because everybody that was there because they were a Marvel fan. and hanging out to see,
But Rihanna,
because
remember we got a lot of spontaneous applause in the movie. Like
yes,
when characters popped up on the screen, they didn't. It was like they didn't even know who the characters were. They just didn't care. They were clapping at the actors when the credits. I mean, this happens every time I've been. When they go actor by actor in the closing credits, they're getting ovations
yeah,
for for everybody. And I don't really remember any of that in any other movie, any other
no,
Marvel movie.
no, yeah. I mean, it was far more energy. I would say that the energy was similar to when I saw Wonder Woman on opening night.
Okay, I can see that.
Because I remember when I went to Wonder Woman, there was a girl sitting behind me that was just like, I just cannot wait. I am so excited for this movie. I can't believe this movie is actually here. I can't, I just sort of felt a lot of that at when we went in. So yeah, it definitely was a different energy.
Yeah, I know at my screening, a lot of folks were dressed up in like traditional African clothing, and were clearly kind of making an event of it, and it was just fun. Like that was just a interesting, exciting, different element than just going to a plain old movie, and so that was cool. I definitely did notice the lines that got the most response in our showing were the ones that cut on some of the sort of more racial political edge, like when Michael B. Jordan talks about how did your ancestors get this artifact. Like there's like like all through the theater, and then when Shuri teases about the colonizers coming after her, I think that was the biggest laugh of the night too.
Oh yes,
So.
yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I think Shuri probably got 2 out of the 5 top laugh lines. It was that one and the "What are those" line, and then of course M'Baku had 2 really good lines. But yeah. I mean, the colonizer thing is gonna stick with us for a while, I think.
All right. Well, I think that wraps our conversation about Black Panther. All right. We're going to go through our mailbag here just to see a little bit of the comments from the good folks on the internet. A couple of comments from last week's show. Asgardian of the Galaxy was just saying that they felt kind of like we did about the Netflix stuff, that at this point they don't get butterflies anymore when they see a trailer. They said, up till Luke Cage, they kind of felt that way. They're like, oh, this is the next one coming. And because of the quality kind of falling off, they just don't get that excited anymore. They also mentioned that Punisher was not very interesting to them. It does seem that where Punisher was good for a lot of people, the people who didn't like it really just didn't like it. So, Valar X Magulus, I never know exactly the tone of this commenter, said we need to talk about Venom. All the talk about those theories and speculations, the trailer did its job wonderfully. So I think they're trying to say that the ambiguity of the trailer kind of worked, and that it made us hypothesize and think and talk so much about what the movie might be. Do you buy that theory, Rhiannon?
If people were still talking about it this week, I would.
But they're not.
But well, I mean, granted, Black Panther is going to take up all conversation right now, but I would only buy that if I still wanted to talk about it later. And it's just not.
To be fair, I did hear 1 or 2 people in the screening of Black Panther I went to. We got the Venom trailer, and 1 or 2 people around me said, oh yeah, I think I want to see that. That looks interesting. And I was like, really? I was shocked. Apparently the trailer worked for somebody.
Okay.
Didn't work for Love Waffle. It does seem like the trailer is doing to Venom what that EW picture did to Inhumans. The movie was already riding a wave of bad sentiment, so this might have been Sony's only chance to convince people Venom is something they should be excited for, and they blew it. So that was his succinct feelings on that. Iguard was just saying that if Netflix wants to keep going forward, They need to go ahead and forego their roots of being grounded, and start going into some new things. I'm not sure exactly how grounded Netflix really... I mean, we talk about that, but I mean, they were bringing people back from the dead in season 2, right? When Nobu came back.
Mm-hmm.
I actually heard somebody talk about the Jessica Jones trailer, and they're like, well, obviously not going to bring Kilgrave back because Netflix is not that kind of world. And I'm like, how many people have been brought back from the dead on the Netflix shows? At least 2 or 3 at this point, you know? So I always find that kind of interesting, the perception versus the reality of how supernatural or not Netflix is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Devil Dinosaur had a great idea for a future podcast, basically just saying what's going on with Fox. They keep giving the green light to weird movies, like a Shadowcat movie with TJ Miller is the latest thing that's been coming around. And he's just like, what are they doing? Are they just making plans in case the deal fails, or are they hoping that Feige will pick these up and run with them? He said it could be a good topic to talk about on the podcast, and I agree. I think the short version for me is I think that some of these people are hoping that some of the execs at Fox are like, sure, whatever, we're going to be out of a job in a year. And so they're kind of greenlighting stuff and giving money away for projects that they're not sure about, but maybe that's just cynical. Do you have any thoughts on this, Rhiannon, about why we're getting so much random stuff out of Fox as this deal comes closer?
I mean, I guess they have to proceed as if the deal isn't happening and keep working on, whatever, you know, getting things completed. I don't know. No, I don't really have strong thoughts. I just keep ignoring it and like, okay, so they're moving forward with things. That doesn't mean they'll ever actually become movies.
Yeah. As long as Gambit stays dead, I'll be happy. I do not want to see a Gambit movie. Because the problem is I'm going to have to see it. Like, even with the DC stuff that I hate, I feel like I have to see it. And I don't want to have to see a Gambit movie. It's just, I have no interest.
Yeah.
Anthony Wickheiser said his biggest problem with Venom is that there have been a lot of good or enjoyable storylines, but there's only one great Venom storyline. And that is the storyline of how the symbiote got put on Peter Parker and then got put on Venom. And that's the one story he knows that he can't get out of this movie. So why would you do a Venom movie if you have no access to the one storyline you really want? So Chris had several comments on some different things. But Hellcat, he actually is a Hellcat fan, so he helped fill us in a little bit on the character. He said, I'm a big Patsy fan of the comics. Yes, Caleb, you're sort of right that she's a lighter character now, especially in her last ongoing series. Patsy was actually created in the 40s as a teen rom-com comic book character, which is why I love the Hannah Montana type background in Jessica Jones. Marvel decided to bring her back into the fold decades later and gave her a suit worn by another hero called the Cat from years before her reintroduction. She would end up joining the Defenders as a pretty consistent member for some time. She also married the son of Satan, Damien Hellstorm, which I did not know, which led her to commit suicide. At some point, I can't recall if prior to death or because of her rebirth, she gained supernatural powers. Also, I could totally see Trish going the costume route because she would have to hide her identity considering she's well known, and she is clearly more inclined to really lean into the superhero tropes. So I thought that was all pretty good. That's data I didn't have about that character. And I did think it's a really good point about that she would need to hide her identity more than some of the other characters would,
Yeah.
All right. I think that does it for our episode. So, Rhiannon, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I feel like this week my brain has been on nothing but Black Panther. So it's good to stop there.
Yeah, it's been one of those movies where I wake up in the morning and I'm like, Black Panther? Black Panther? Oh, I have other things in life to think about. I'm thinking about it when I wake up from, just processing, I guess, while I sleep. So,
Yes.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. You can interact with us a lot of ways. Send us messages on Twitter via @MarvelNewsDesk. You can also communicate with us via SoundCloud or the MCU Exchange posts each week. If you want to support the show, give us $1 a month over at Patreon or more. You can sign up for that at marvelnewsdesk.com. Also, that will get you access to our special MCU film ranking episode, available only to our Patreon supporters. You can help the show be more visible to others if you leave a 5-star review on iTunes. The number one thing you can do, however, and do each week, is that you tell your friends. We want to thank Tim Cox for our logo. You can find him on Instagram at TimVCox. And thanks to Alvin for our theme music. You can find his music at The Skull School across a whole bunch of social media platforms. Thanks for listening to the podcast again this week, and we'll see you later, guys. Bye.